as we're seeing all of these influencers and people using those modalities of, burning sage and, plant medicine, earth medicine journeys and so on, like, I think there needs to be an honoring of those people who, against prosecution, vilification, exotification for the past 500 years, even torture, they kept these practices alive, even though it was dangerous for them to do so. And they went underground and did it. And now, people are doing it and it's kind of cool and like trendy, and I think it's really helping people too. But I think it's, so part of my show at TLACUÂ PAHTIＡ was to invite public participation in some of the artwork, but also to learn more about the Indigenous Medicine Conservation Fund and to contribute to it. So I think these original people and stewards of this wisdom and knowledge of these healing practices of Indigenous medicines all over the world, not even just Mesoamerica, need to have a seat at the table when policy and even on the cultural level, when people make decisions, you need to be thinking about this idea of reciprocity and honoring the original holders. That is inherently, an Indigenous value, and I think it's important to not just say it or to do maybe a superficial acknowledgement or something. I think we need to have an in-depth look at where these practices are coming from.
What if this is all just a dream?
Hello, my name is Rebecca Nava Soto, and I am a multidisciplinary Xicanx and Latinx artist based in Cincinnati, Ohio. I use ephemeral materials, mixed media materials that continue a lineage of art making practices and history rooted in my Mesoamerican Indigenous background. And so some of the themes that I explore are language, specifically pictographic language. I'm really inspired by Mesoamerican writing systems, this process of abstraction from the natural and man-made world that dates back thousands of years. So these images were brought down into the most salient point to create this sort of abstract pictographs that communicate words and meanings. So I've been really inspired by that pictographic language and creating some of my own based on the way that my ancestors did it. And so I'm also inspired by reconnection to land and history. I'm working on a project in the research stage. This research I did this summer for Indigenous basically rematriation efforts, but also just history in the United States and the Americas. And then finally, this past ArtsWave Truth and Reconciliation grant in 2023 was titled TLACUÂ PAHTIＡ. That's a Nahuatl term that means to eat, to heal. And it was an exhibit, immersive installation that was a poetic response to Indigenous medicines and healing practices and modalities. I was inspired by the reconnection, or the connection I've always had to my Indigenous roots through my mother's cooking. The ArtsWave Truth and Reconciliation grant supported a residency that I had at the Welcome Project's, Wave Pool's Welcome Project, Art and Food residency. And it was an immersive exhibit that talked about food and healing and earth medicines and healing. And so I collaborated through the inspiration of my mother's cooking, my abuelita's cooking in Mexico, who's still alive, by the way, 97 years old, Abuelita Licha, and the poet and healer, Maria Sabina, who was a Mazatecan healer from Oaxaca, Mexico. And so one of her poems was a source of inspiration, as well as another poem by Carlos Blasola that he's part of the decriminalized nature movement in California. And so that was my show that was up in April through June of this year. And it was an incredible experience. So parts of that will be featured in my upcoming show at the Weston Art Gallery opening September 15th. So you can still catch some of it. It was perfectly aligned. It was incredible, really. I mean, I had received that grant the two previous years. And I think the big umbrella of truth and reconciliation, I had many ideas. So I was able to formulate and come up with some great projects, I felt, for those previous two. But the one for this year was like something that had been happening in my life that I was thinking, oh my gosh, at some point I've got to do something about this other topic that I'm really interested in, and it was my introduction to be able to do it. And so it was like, when it first came, when I saw that the proposal was up, I said, oh, that is exactly, I've been thinking about this stuff and doing this for since 2019. So I was just really, and it was like an everyday thing, just all of these different writing practices, meditative practices, imagination techniques that were used by the people of Teotihuacan, Tenochtitlan. And so I was like, okay, I guess it's time to put this into a visual form. And it was just really fast. It came, it was these, I don't know if you're able to see images, but there's these big panels that will be shown at the Weston that are like see-through clear, Duralar, panels with the mycelial network, so people can see each other through it. And there's the poem by Plazola speaks about the mycelial network and how, the indigenous people around the world just really saw themselves inextricably linked to the natural world. And so the mycelial network is just a beautiful metaphor for connection and mutual aid, underground and unseen. I just was really inspired by this poem. So that's perfectly aligned and just came really fast, basically. So I was awarded this the grant, and so it was like two part support by the art residency, food and art residency at the Welcome Project, Wave Pool's Welcome Project, and so I had the whole space to create an immersive experience. I think I saw maybe on a blurb or something as part of their residency that said immersive. And I thought, so instead of one piece, it was meant to be something that you walked into this room and the walls were all painted black and there was writing in white. The poetry was written on the walls in white. And then there's a floor piece that went around the perimeter. That was this DNA strand that spoke about generational trauma. It was ephemeral. And so when it was destroyed with prayers for aiding personal family trauma, which we all have. So I was really trying to use art as ritual for the first time in a really direct way. And then also there was an olfactory element with this resin that I burned at the opening. It's from the sacred ceiba tree in Mesoamerican. So it smells really, it's like a cousin of frankincense, copal. And so you could smell this incense, and then you walk through the panels and see people through it, read the poetry. And at the very back, there was a healing table, which which invited participation from people who came in I invited them to do a practice that I do with the imagination, an imagination technique. And it was inspired by, I also was inspired by TLACUÂ. It's a healing practice from Mexico, Indigenous Mexico, where you put curling, like where you put like planing wood, basically, which is crazy because that's actually what I use for making my installations when I was researching this. You put it on top of a body, wood shavings or corn kernels, different pigmented earth, and with prayers. And it sort of is this idea of extracting the ailment from the body with prayers and with this material. But I did it in a way so people wrote down something that they wanted to have healed, or somebody that they know that might be struggling with, something mental, physical, emotional, and put it down on the table. And then they had a selection of different color wood shavings below the table and corn. And so people were just writing all of this pain on the paper and then putting material on top of it. Anyway, what was, I didn't know how it was going to turn out, but basically people started to create this tabletop piece of different colors and forms. And it turned out to be a collective made artwork from people coming in and sort of having that quiet moment of reflection and prayer, basically, and also implementing the imagination. There was some other steps in there. So and again, it was so much, I had so much to say and feel about. It was really a poetic response because I'm not very didactic. So I was like, sure, I'll do an immersive experience. And then when I decide to do something and then it's happening, it's like, this is insane how much work this is you're doing. But it's just sort of, my body gets co-opted, with the help of wonderful assistants and volunteers. And it just driven to be done, It has just transformed really my life in powerful ways. I mean, it really, really propelled my work to 10 steps, 20 steps, just so many steps further than I could have possibly done on my own. To be an ArtsWave Truth and Reconciliation Grant recipient this year, and also for the last 2 years, has meant what it's meant for me in my life. It's really meant just a complete transformation of my life and my practice. And that has fed every part of me and my family. The ripple effect is immeasurable, but it's really allowed my work to be exemplified and manifested in such a robust way and such a far-reaching way without limitations, regular, without the grants, I would have had more limitations, but so it just gave me the resources to really push the imagery, push the experience, push my engagement, my time, my energy. It was just like the heavens opened up. It was really a gift. That was the perfect timing for me in my life. So it was very cosmically timed, I feel like, for me, and divine timing. That's what I meant. And so I am eternally grateful for it. I mean, forever. It will always look back at this moment as this very pivotal moment in my life, And from this grant, so much has been born. Like I just got back from 2 incredible artist residencies in Colorado, where I was able to parent artist residencies. I was able to do further research on these different ruin sites, really reach back into my heritage, have incredible experiences of a lifetime, and offer that to my family, my children. And also in upstate New York, I was part of the Elizabeth Murray Artist Residency for parents this August, and it just felt like a dream. It really felt like a dream. Like I just shifted basically, timelines in the most beautiful way. So I'm so grateful, and I don't have to think about that further and write it down. There's probably a more concise way to say it, but it's really been life changing in the best way. So I'm glad it's continuing, and that other people will continue to be able to have similar experiences. Mm-hmm. So truth and healing. What's my truth that I'm? So I think there was a hidden truth that was part of who I was and my heritage, and what made me me, basically. Like most, um, like most people who grew up in a certain lineage of belief systems and culture, even education, they're able to follow, for example, my white artist counterparts were able to follow a trajectory of art history that included their line in it, and so this project has given me the capacity, the support that for me to pursue and course correct what I had not been able to be privy to or a part of um, in my own lineage, my own indigenous lineage. So because it wasn't just part of the status quo or the canon or the culture, it was something you have to kind of really, especially me living in the Midwest, it was something I had to really dig into. And so the project for me was a way to express that, and the support to express that uh, connection to the truth and wisdom of indigenous uh, ways of life, ways of seeing, ways of operating, and relationship to the world, to their selves, to myself, and so I think a lot of marginalized people, have struggled to have that kind of strength in who they are and what their history is into an elevated place. And so it was really a way to honor that truth of who I am, that had been shrouded for much of my life. So I don't know how you put um, you put a value on that. It's just immeasurable. So I've noticed that in culture, social media culture and healing culture online is very ubiquitous now. And a lot of these are sourcing indigenous practices, and so as we're as I'm seeing that, and I'm seeing that the communities at large really look to indigenous practices for healing, for healing modalities and implementing these new techniques. I think it's important um, to honor the original holders of this, because for example, Maria Sabina, one of the poets, healers that I featured as a inspiration for my show, was one of the Mazatecan healers that got really famous for sharing these mushroom veladas with rock stars from the 60s. And it sort of opened a Pandora's box where people no longer honored exactly how this humble, powerful woman did it. And so it caused her to lose everything she had, really. It just, I think her house got burned down. It just completely destroyed the ecosystem of her little village in Oaxaca. And so, as we're seeing all of these influencers and people using those modalities of, burning sage and, plant medicine, earth medicine journeys, and so on, like, I think there needs to be an honoring of those people who, against prosecution, vilification, exotification for the past 500 years, even torture, like to they kept these practices alive, even though it was dangerous for them to do so. And they went underground and did it. And now, people are doing it. And it's kind of cool and like trendy, and I think it's really helping people too. But I think it's, so part of my show at TLACUÄ was to invite public uh, participation in some of the artwork, but also to learn more about the Indigenous Medicine Conservation Fund and to contribute to it. So I think these original people and stewards of this wisdom and knowledge of these healing practices of indigenous medicines all over the world, not even just Mesoamerica, need to have a seat at the table when policy and even on the cultural level, when people make decisions, you need to be thinking about this idea of reciprocity and honoring the original holders. That is inherently, an indigenous value, and I think it's important to not just say it or to do maybe a superficial like acknowledgement or something. I think we need to have an in-depth look at where these practices are coming from. And also, if it isn't part of your lineage, maybe look into your own lineage, because everybody has indigenous people. If you go back enough, in Europe, there's indigenous people, all over the world. So I think it's easy to say, oh, I just, I'm going to take from this culture and that culture. I mean, this sort of repeating, very problematic parts of our history in new ways. So I think just asking these questions and not just accepting things at one level, but asking these questions about our responsibility in using any of these modalities of healing, and even like, I don't know, just so many questions about sitting in different ceremonies and sage, and like, I think it's like, where did this originate from? How can we support these original holders? So that's sort of what I was thinking of with the undercurrent, even myself, for example, of having the privilege that I have, that, the abuelitas living in the campos don't, and their families. Indigenous communities are really struggling socioeconomically. There's a huge disparity there. And so to be taking and profiting from, these practices and not really seeing the real people who are actually still here and thriving on earth despite all odds, and knowing and having a way of supporting them and thinking about how to responsibly honor them. I think everybody needs to think about that, as we're in this really like palpable period of time of reconciliation. And so it's good. It's a good time, I think, to be having this introspection and questioning of ourselves individually, including myself. I would invite viewers to explore the power of the imagination. That's universal. And I think a lot of indigenous cultures from around the world used imagination, not just for creating artworks or even imagining cities. It's quite powerful place to spend some time in. And that's one thing. I would say the second thing, look into the Indigenous Medicine Conservation Fund. And if you go to my website, there's another great organization, Indigenous run, culture, not even a cultural center. It's kind of a space to regenerate language, the Nahuatl language, in Cointepec, Mexico. The school, it's not even a school. Like, all these terms are just, we like to give these terms, but it's sort of a space that's being built. It's called Xicanx. It's in Cointepec, Morelos, Mexico. And so I encourage people to go to the website and to donate. There's QR codes there to learn more about these incredible indigenous regeneration and protective measures and agencies. And so, yeah, so if you want to know what you can do, if you look at the art, come see the show on September 15th. There'll be an opportunity to also to donate and learn more about those organizations as well. This show, TLACUÂ, was in response to a poetic response and an honoring of indigenous wisdom, medicinal practices, and earth medicine practices and healing modalities. Those that I have reconnected with since 2019, but not because I'm now an expert at all of this. And here's my show. Really, what I've noticed with my last 3 shows, that it's an honoring, but it's also, for me, it's an invitation for others, but really for myself. I feel like my show, my work has been asking to bring something new into my life. And it's been really interesting. The last 2 series that I've done have really worked in that way, through this sort of imaginal technique that I've used while making these works. But so this one, we'll see what happens. But I just wanted to make that note that it's not that, oh, I'm this expert and it's sort of an open language, because I'm open still to knowing more. I feel like I just started. So I'm excited for this journey of reconnection further, and inviting more in.